Okay, so I think this is the hardest part about writing a book. There's a lot of parts that are hard about writing a book because it's this big thing and it takes a long time and it's hard to formulate all your thoughts. And then there's all the work that goes into actually sitting down every day and putting the words onto the page. But one of the things I discovered writing, it was my second book. It wasn't even my first book. It was the second book. I discovered this the hard way. See, on my first book, I wrote it in this fit of frenzy. I had just sat down with this woman who I wanted to marry. I sat down with her parents and asked for their permission to marry their daughter. And I'm sitting there in their living room, and it's over Christmas one year. And I asked their permission. And her mom looks at me and she goes, "Well, what are you going to do to provide for our daughter?" And up to that point, I was just like this broke ass rock climber, right? And I didn't really have any prospects in life. And it was the very first time anybody's question of like, how are you going to take care of me or somebody else? How are you going to provide? How are you going to be a meaningful contributor to society? It's the first time that ever came up. And I remember leaving that conversation with this chip on my shoulder and being like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you. And for whatever reason, I went in my mind to who makes a lot of money? Who makes a lot of money? And I thought of Stephen King. For some reason, Stephen King jumped into my mind. And that could have been because, when I was younger, my dad gave me a book on writing by Stephen King. I was a big fiction reader. I was reading a ton of fiction. So like the first place my mind went was Stephen King. So I decided that day I was going to become the next Stephen King. And I made a decision that starting the next day, I would wake up every day at 5 a.m. and write 3,000 words for the next year. Now, the way that I came to 3,000 words was when you Google the 10,000 hour rule. You're probably familiar with this idea that Malcolm Gladwell said that we need to put in about 10,000 hours to establish mastery in an activity, right? I was like, well, what's the equivalent in writing? Because surely just 10,000 hours doesn't correlate with anything in particular when it comes to writing, because I could write 10 words during that 10,000 hours. So what's the word count equivalent? And what I read everywhere was, 1,000,000 words. You have to write about 1,000,000 words before you find the words worth writing. And so I was like, okay, well, if I got to get 1,000,000 crappy words out of the way, I might as well just bust through that as quickly as possible. And so my theory was, okay, 3,000 words every day for a year is about 1,000,000 words. So by the end of this year, I will have gotten my 1,000,000 words out of the way and I will be ready to be published. I will be a good writer. That's how I worked backwards from the goal. And I was like, here's the input that will lead to the output. So every day for the next year, I sat down, I wrote 3,000 words. Sure enough, at the end of the year, I had 1,000,000 words. 6 months after that, I had my first book published, right? And so that's a huge quantity. That was a lot of words, right? Most writers, most professional writers are only doing maybe 1,000 to 1,500 words a day. Those are professionals. That's all they did. And I was doing double that. And I did that for an entire year. So I pumped out that first book in this frenzied heat. And I was like, I'm going to get this thing out there. I was really motivated, right? And then I started into the second book. And that's where things got interesting because I took the same approach with that book. But something started to happen, which was that second book was really difficult from a complexity perspective. The first book was written from one character's perspective, the entire thing. It's very easy to write from one person's viewpoint. The second book was written from 4 different characters' viewpoints, and it all interwove. And so suddenly I had to become a different type of writer. Right, I had to learn to tell a different kind of narrative. I had to learn how to tell stories from different people's perspectives, and that was very difficult. Incredible. You can see the blog article I wrote during this period of time, which was the second book nearly killed me because it was so freaking hard. The thing that was hardest about it, though, and this is why I'm doing this video. This is why I think is the hardest thing about writing a book. And this doesn't have anything to do with writing a book in particular. I should probably led with that. But like, even if you're not an author, even if you're not writing a book, like this still matters to you if you're in pursuit of mastery. This is the problem that will stop you from achieving it or moving towards it or just stalling out. It is, as I was writing that second book, I was growing at this incredible rate. And there came a point where within like 3 weeks of writing, 3 weeks doesn't seem like very much, but that was like the equivalent if you're doing 3,000 words a day. That's 100,000 words almost, right? I think so. Well, this is why we don't do math in public, but I think that's about 100,000. That's a lot of words. The average book is only 70,000 words. So every month I was putting out like a whole book, right? So what was happening is the writer I was at the end of the month was demonstrably better than the writer I was at the beginning of the month. And whenever I would look back at what I had written just a few weeks earlier, I was like, that's crap. It's garbage. And it was this really weird experience where the gap between who I was and my skill as a writer in this moment was growing so much faster than where I was at the beginning of it. And Ira Glass calls this the gap. The gap is what occurs. He refers to it a little bit differently, but the idea is that when you get into an activity, you get into it because you maybe want to become a painter, and you look at all the great classical painters in the past, and it resonates with you, and you're like, I want to do that. I want to make great art. Like, it's so beautiful. And you develop this great taste for what good art is. And then you go to do the thing, and you suck at the thing. And you're like, oh, this thing doesn't look like that thing at all. And you can see the gap so clearly between your art and their art because you still have this great taste. You can recognize it. And that gap of closing between what you're capable of producing and that artistic taste or that experience that you have with it, it shrinks, but it shrinks so slowly. And you can get lost in that gap where you're like, what am I even doing here? One of two things either happens is like you're not making progress towards closing the gap as quickly as you want, and you just feel like you're wasting your time. You're like, I'm never going to be the next Stephen King. Look how good he is. Like, look how far away I am. And the better you get, the more you realize how far away you are. Like, it's not like you get better and you go, yeah, I'm getting closer. You get better and you go, I think I'm getting further. Like when you're ignorant of your skill, like what do they call this? Is unconscious incompetence. You're not even conscious of how bad you are at the thing, right? And then there becomes conscious incompetence, which is now you're aware of how bad you are at the thing. And then there becomes conscious competence, which is like now you're aware that you are competent at the thing, right? So there's these different phases. And that phase of going from unconscious ignorance or unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence is very hard. Now, for me, when I was writing, I was looking and I was like, oh my God, I need to go back and do this again. That thing that I had just written earlier this month, I need to go back and rewrite it because I'm now better than I was at that point. And I'd go back and I'd rewrite it, and guess what would happen? As I'd get to the end of it and I go, I'm better than I was. I should go back and do it again. And so I go back and I do it again. I rewrote that second book like 12 times. 12 times. Because I just kept getting to like the end and going, oh, I can do it better. And I go back and do it again. And I go, oh, I'm better. The book kept getting better by the end than it was at the beginning. I was like, well, I got to even it out. I got to go make the beginning better. So I'd go back and make the beginning better. But now I'm like, well, now the beginning is even better than the ending. Now I got to do the ending again. And it was this loop of perfection. And it was killing me because I couldn't see an end in sight. And I was like, well, I'm going to be stuck in this project forever. And I'll tell you what, like nothing will kill your soul faster than rewriting the same book 12 times. Eventually you're just like, I freaking hate this book. And that's where I was getting to. I was hating the book. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this anymore. And it got to the point where one day I just had this realization that it's not about making the book as good as the book can be. It's about making the book as good as you can make the book, given your skill in that moment. And there has to come a line in the sand where you just say, this is the book. This is the best book I'm capable of creating in this moment right now. And just saying, I'm done with it. I'm shipping it because real artists ship. It's something that Steve Jobs said, right? But it's so easy in these creative endeavors as we're moving towards mastery to never ship because we're constantly moving towards that perfection of like, oh, I can do this better. I can do it a little bit better. And it's true. You can do it better. And I look back on my first book, my second book, my third book, my fourth book, and each one of those books, I'm like, I could do it better now. But if I had waited to publish them until I was as good as I am now, I never would have gotten to where I am now. And so there's this weird paradox of growth that has to occur in here. Now, all of that's to say, as you're pursuing whatever the thing is that you're passionate about, whether that's business, entrepreneurship, writing books, art, whatever, I don't care what it is, you need to be able to chunk backwards to what is the input on the day and just focus on that and then draw the line in the sand and say, I'm going to write these 3,000 words every single day. And at the end of the year, I'm going to publish what I have. It doesn't matter if I can make it better. I'm going to publish the thing. Or the YouTube video, I'm going to put in the time. I'm going to do the rep. And at a certain point, I'm just going to hit publish, right? That's the only way that you're going to be able to level up and grow into that next version is by actually publishing the thing. So I hope this brings you a little bit of value, helps you understand the hardest part about doing anything worth doing, not just writing a book, but anything worth accomplishing in life. This is one of the things that's going to stand in your way. And it's nothing other than just you. You looking at your own work and realizing, ah, shit, I suck at this. I should do it better, right? And then at some point just being comfortable saying like, I'm okay with everybody else knowing that it sucks, right? Minimum viable product. So anywho, kind of got rambly there. Hope this brings you guys a little bit of value, a little bit different episode than usual today. Let me know if you liked it. If not, stay quiet and I'll see you in the next episode.